Madam Web is a disaster. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't believe that or doesn't agree that it is a complete unmitigated disaster. It made $51 million in its first 5 days worldwide. Okay, not a 3-day opening weekend number, not just domestic numbers, worldwide. It has made $51 million in not a weekend, but in 5 days. Because remember, it opened on Wednesday. So it's a complete unmitigated disaster, no doubt. But it brings up the question, what do they need to do? Because everybody's got their theories about like what they need to do in the Sony kind of verse of their Spider-Man-less films about what they need to do to kind of make this thing work, right? Some people are saying, oh, you got to have it more interconnected. Some people are saying, oh, you've got to run this storyline from the comics and that'll magically just make everything better. And I don't agree with any of that. I don't think there's any like formula that's going to take the state of the Sony Spider-Verse and you just apply a formula or a certain combination of this person and this person or a certain story, because it ain't going to fix it when the ultimate bottom line problem is they're not making great movies. Now, I'm also not, unaware of the fact that despite, the problems they've had, that Sony has had some big wins. Right? And we're not talking about the older Spider-Man. We're not talking about the Amazing Spider-Man or the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. We're not talking about that, but we're talking about recently. Huge, huge, huge wins. Into the Spider-Verse wins the Academy Award. Across the Spider-Verse, huge jump in the box office and very good chance it could win the Academy Award. The 2 Venom films that we've had have made over $1.3 billion at the box office. And I've really enjoyed them. The first one more than the second, but still huge successes, right? But then we get into Morbius and we get into Madam Web, and it's become apparent that when it comes to at least the live action stuff of their Sony Spider-Verse, they have completely lost their way. So Rob, I want to propose the 3 steps that I think Marvel or Sony needs to undertake to fix their Spider-Man-less Spider-Verse. And those 3 steps, I believe, are this. Number 1, slow down. At one point, Sony had in their Spider-Verse 4 live action films in various stages of development. They had Madam Web going. They had Kraven the Hunter going. They had a Venom 3 going. And they had, don't forget, El Muerto going. All at the same time. Sony never did that before back in the heyday of the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man or the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. They focused on one film at a time. And Sony has no experience whatsoever of trying to juggle this many balls in the air at the same time. Some might say they have some ball juggling experience, but not this kind. All going at the same time. And Rob, one of the things that this means is that you are now diluting your talent pool that's available to you. So if you had a bunch of directors that you were considering working with, and if you were developing and working on one film at a time, you could go out and take your best director that you've got lined up, right? But if you've got 4 in development at the same time, you're now taking the second choice that you wouldn't have picked before, the third choice you wouldn't have picked before, and all the way down to the 4th choice that you wouldn't have picked before. And now you're working with 3 directors that otherwise you wouldn't have worked with because you got 4 films going at the same time. It dilutes your talent base. It's all that kind of stuff. And it's clearly just too much for them to handle at the same time. So the first thing that I would suggest to Sony to fix their Spider-Verse is slow the F down. All right. You're not Marvel. You've never done this. And it took Marvel a decade to build up to the point that they could have like 3 or 4 projects on the go at once. And even they're slowing down. Even Marvel, who has experience at doing this, they have now decided that they're going too fast and they need to slow down. You do too. Okay. So step 1 for Sony, slow down. Step 2. Give the same care and attention to the live action films that you do to the animated films. What I mean by that is this. When they were making their Spider-Man live action films or animated films, go and look at the credit list. I'm not talking about the voice talent, although they got some great voice talent. I'm saying go and look at, who they were working with. They went out and partnered with Lord and Miller to make their Spider-Verse that has a track record of success. They brought on some directors. One didn't have any directing experience, but has worked a lot in animation production. And then they had 2 other co-directors with them that had more background experience. They just put care and attention when making their animated Spider-Verse films before they started making the film. They said, these are important. Let's get the right people and put the right people in charge. That is fundamentally, we've seen this happen in the world of Star Wars, Rob. That is fundamentally the most important thing a studio can do, is to start by getting the right people on board who will be the filmmakers and steer this thing. That is the main thing the studio's got to do. And they put that care and attention into their Spider-Verse animated film. They even did it to a degree with their Venom films. They went out and got a proven star in Tom Hardy, and they worked with screenwriters and directors who don't have the Martin Scorsese name, but they have some experience and have had some success. And the result was you've got 2 Venom films. Then they brought on Andy Serkis for the second one, who had been knocking it out of the park with his smaller films that he'd been directing. And you got 2 Venom films that have collectively made $1.3 billion. Rob, the 2 Venom films together have made almost very close to the same amount of money that the 2 Deadpool movies have made. Yeah. Because they put care and attention into putting the right people there to make it go. But then we get to Morbius and we get to Madam Web. And what have we seen? With Morbius, they literally went out and got the 2 worst writers working in Hollywood today. And I'm not trying to be mean. I'm sure they're super nice guys and are super talented in many, many other ways. But the 2 guys had literally written some of the worst films in Hollywood in the last number of years, with Dracula Untold and The Last Witch Hunter and, on and on and on. They literally went out. They didn't care. They got the 2 worst writers in Hollywood. That movie fell on its face. And then when they were doing Madam Web, they're like, you know what? Let's go back to those same 2 guys and do it again. They clearly did not care. With the animated films, with the Venom films, you may have loved or not loved those films, but you can't deny that when you look at them, they clearly put more care into who they put in place in those movies behind the cameras than they did once they got to Morbius and Madam Web. So number 1 for me that Sony's got to do is they got to slow down. Number 2, put the same care and attention into these films that you put into the animated ones, putting the right people in place. The third thing I would suggest that they need to do is stop trying to confuse your Spider-Verse with the MCU. Guys, we want to take a second to thank a sponsor of this video, Mint Mobile. On average, it takes about 30 days for a person to break their New Year's resolution. So if saving money was on your 2024 list, your odds aren't looking that great. Luckily, I have a 100% guaranteed way to save you money this year. Just switch to Mint Mobile. For a limited time, wireless plans from Mint Mobile are $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan. That's unlimited talk, text, and data for $15 a month. I've told you guys many times that after switching to Mint Mobile, I am spending less than a third on my cell bill than I used to with a major carrier. Say goodbye to your overpriced wireless plans, jaw-dropping monthly bills, and unexpected overages. All Mint plans come with unlimited talk and text plus high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. And don't worry about having to change phones or numbers. Use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all your existing contacts. So guys, to get this new customer offer and your new 3-month unlimited wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/Campea. That's mintmobile.com/Campea. Cut your wireless bills to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/Campea. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. When you look at the animated Spider-Verse films, they don't try to make people think they're in the MCU. They're not obsessed with the MCU. I mean, Yes, yes, yes. You've got that. Don't even get me started about that little nerd on Earth, whatever, referring to the Tom Holland thing. And yes, you had, Donald Glover, in the prison. Okay, yes, but none of that was in the marketing. They don't have, what's the best way to put it? They got a tiny dick and they have big dick envy. I mean, I don't know how else to put it with Sony. Stop trying to mimic and be or confuse the audience into thinking that you're the MCU. Well, all you got to do is go back and even just look at the trailers for Morbius. And what did they make sure they threw in there? Look at how much Michael Keaton was in those trailers. You'd almost think Michael Keaton was in an hour of the film. And then they had to make sure they threw in that what are you talking about? The graffiti on the wall with Spider-Man, right? It's like we were so obsessed with trying to trick the audience or make the audience think it's Marvel, or they're so obsessed with Marvel. They're like, the only way we can work is we make them think it's the MCU. No, you don't. You've had success doing other things. And then we get into Madam Web, and I don't care about spoiling Madam Web because it's a piece of garbage. But you've got all these girls dressed up like spider characters we've seen hinted at in other movies. You even, like, there's a scene in the movie, Rob, where these jungle men in Peru are climbing down trees and their outfits all look like they're Spider-Men. Like, they all look like they're Spider-Men in first glance. Your villain is dressed up like a darker, almost a symbiote kind of looking Spider-Man. Stop being so obsessed with being the MCU. You're not the MCU. And when you haven't been obsessed with being the MCU, you've had some success. So, again, my 3 steps for Sony fixing the Spider-Verse has nothing to do with adapt this storyline from the comics. That won't matter if you're making bad movies and making bad decisions and putting the wrong people in place and trying to produce 5 movies at the same time. None of that matters. The only 3 things that matter, I propose, Rob, are number 1, slow down. Number 2, show the same care and attention that you have with a couple of your other films, particularly the Spider-Verse films and maybe in the first Venom. And 3, stop trying to confuse yourselves and your audience, and stop trying to be the MCU and pretending like you're in the MCU. But John, at the post-credit scene, we saw Tom Hardy. Yeah, I get that, but stop trying to do all this nonsense. And Rob, I believe if somehow, some way, Sony can get back to the basics, get one movie going at a time, put the right people in charge of those movies, put a lot of energy and effort into making sure you got the right people running them, and then make them their own movie without trying to be Marvel, I still believe they can make this thing successful because, Rob, when they've done that, they have been successful. Anyway, Rob, when you're looking at the mess that Sony is in right now with this particular thing, with the Spider-Verse stuff, what do you think about my list? What would you suggest to them that they need to do to get this thing turned around?
Well, I think your suggestions are good ones, but I think both in the case of Morbius and the case of Madam Web, those characters are not marquee villains. They're secondary characters at best. And it was an odd choice for me. Venom makes total sense. Venom is a marquee villain. Venom was a fan favorite. Venom always puts a smile on people's face when he turns up. I mean, sure. Sometimes they go a little far in the comics, but Venom is something that makes sense to me. We saw him in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3, so it's not an unknown quantity. But suddenly injecting a vampire into the Spider-Verse or their Spider-Verse and not letting him, if you're going to bring a vampire has to kill people by definition and drink their blood. They cut out all the blood. They toned down what was going on. And at the end of the day, because they couldn't lean into the Spider-Verse elements of it all, you basically have a half-baked vampire movie. And in the world that we live in, vampire movies, we've gotten some really great vampire movies, not the least of which were Blade and Guillermo del Toro's Blade 2. So giving us a half-baked vampire movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe was a mistake. And then look, John, we wantonly made fun of Madam Web. I think the problem was, who decided that if you have the entire Spider-Verse at your disposal, that you're going to make a Madam Web movie and then not even lean into the way she was in the comics? So it's not even like you're adapting a Spider-Verse character. You've taken one, and there's that clip of the writer on the red carpet going, well, she doesn't really have a backstory in the comics, so we were free to do whatever we want. And I'm thinking to myself, what? She does have a backstory. You just choose to ignore it. And it was an amalgamation of things, and they weren't leaning into, they didn't even use it as really a jump off point. And now you've got Kraven the Hunter. You've got a great actor. Kraven looks great. I mean, he looks physical, but again, you're sort of straying away from what Kraven was in the comics. And I really am baffled by what they're hoping to accomplish. I mean, Madam Web seriously damaged their IP. I think the Venom movies are safe because people think of them as their own thing. But they really damaged what they were trying to do. And what I don't understand is when you're working on a cinematic universe, one movie or a couple movies can derail your entire plan. And between Morbius and Madam Web, how much money was lost?
Well, I mean, to your point, I was saying this on the show the other day. Like, I have been, some would suggest naively optimistic about Kraven, right? Madam
Me
Web
too.
has kind of killed my maybe that's not fair, but it's true. Madam Web has killed it. And I was saying this the other day too, Rob. It just proves when everybody was crying what David Zaslav did by killing Batgirl, it proves he was 100% right, because Sony should have just never released this film, because then maybe Kraven might have still stood a chance, because it doesn't now, because even I've lost my enthusiasm for Kraven.
I mean, the thing is, everybody involved with Madam Web, their career has been damaged. S.J. Clarkson, who by all accounts has worked on, as a director, many great television shows. She probably will never direct a feature film again unless it's something that's a low-budget indie film that she could maybe raise the financing for. But this, whether it's Dakota Johnson, who I like very much, everybody involved with this movie, and Sony especially, has been sort of irrevocably damaged. Because as they say in Hollywood, you're only as good as your last film. But I just don't understand why somebody thought this movie was a good idea in the first place. That's what baffles me. Of all the things they could do, and we even talked about it, that it could have been a fascinating film.
When we heard what the basic premise was going to kind of be, it had a little bit of a Terminator flavor to it. I thought this could be kind of good.
Yeah.
And I just kind of willfully ignored the fact that they had the Morbius writers back for it. It was just being optimistic, but that didn't work out clearly.
But again, why, having worked in this business and seen how hard it is to get scripts greenlit and made, I really don't understand how anyone, whatever form the script was in, how did they greenlight this film now that we're over 15 years into the MCU and the DCU and independent graphic novel adaptations on the big screen? Why did they feel that this script was the one that they needed to move forward on? That this was the story that we're going to spend our money on? I'm baffled by it.
No, and that's
Tom Rothman ran Fox during the whole X-Men era with Elektra, and you'd think he would know better.
Yeah, that's the thing that kills me. Like, because there's several points of failure here, Rob. And I don't want to make this an entire dissertation about the failure of Madam Web. We're trying to talk about how they improve it. But again, at several stages, they had to have the script and have a group of executives go, yes, this script is great. And then as they were doing dailies, they had to go, yes, this is working out fine. And then even once the director submitted the cut, there had to be Sony execs going, yes, let's release this. I mean, so there were several stages of failure. And we're not even talking about the filmmakers yet. We're talking about just on the executive level. And that's why I think if they can do these things, maybe they can turn this around. They've already shown, Rob, they can make great stuff. We've seen some fabulous stuff, but they can't do the fabulous stuff and then turn out crap like this, because if they continue to turn out crap like this, none of us are going to go see the great stuff because we're not going to believe in it.
I know.
Anyway, guys, question is for you. What do you think are the key things that Sony needs to do to get this thing turned around? It's not about, well, get this actor. If you're just making bad movies, that won't count. Don't go, well, just do this storyline. Irrelevant. If they're going to make it badly, it doesn't matter what storyline you pick. So what things do you think they need to do to turn things around? Jump down to the comments below and let me know your thoughts. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this video. Make sure you like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget, we have a daily podcast called the John Campea Show podcast, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting app of choice. Go and subscribe to it today so it'll be there when you need it.